Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to CTC 230. This is the first lecture in biochemistry, or what we're referring to as organic chemistry 3. This lecture is going to concern the world of carbohydrates. Now, I know that you probably are familiar with the term of carbohydrates. We know carbohydrates because we have to have them in our diet. We eat them every day, and if we eat too much of them, they appear around our waistline and our thighs, and we do not like that, do we? So we're going to talk about the chemical aspect of a carbohydrate, what makes the molecule a carbohydrate, and then we'll walk through maybe some structures and some reactivity concerning the carbohydrate family. But we're going to have to do a little bit of back discussion before we get into the topic of really what a carbohydrate is and what it turns into once you ingest it into your tummy. So we're going to first start off with this term of a biological molecule, right? I mean, that's what we're kind of terming this class. So we're looking at a biomolecule. And every molecule that we are going to be talking about this semester is a biomolecule, or aka bioorganic molecule or compound. So you pick your choice, whatever you want to call it. I don't care what you call it, but a biomolecule or a bioorganic compound, we have to tell you very upfront that these things look complex. Now, the key word here is look. They're not really any more complicated than our traditional basic functional groups. All of these biomolecules, the carbohydrates, the fats, the nucleic acids, the DNA that we will talk about throughout the series of the semester, they all will look complicated because they are. There's a lot of atoms that are connecting pieces for these molecules. However, you need to understand that just because a molecule is large doesn't mean that the chemistry behind them changes. So basically what that means is that when we look at these carbohydrates, what we will see is their structures. We will start off very simple. But we have to understand that these molecules can grow in size enormously. And when they are very large molecules, guess what? Chemistry doesn't change. All of the functional groups still behave like the functional groups should. So if the compound has a OH group on it, if the compound has a carbonyl group on it, well, those OH groups and those carbonyl groups are going to kind of do the same thing as what all of them have done up to this point. So the key word here is look. Right? So bioorganic molecules, of course, are found in biology. So we've already mentioned that this is not a biology course, right? So we're not going to be concerned too much with the biology aspect once we ingest a carbohydrate. What happens as far as our metabolism goes, what happens as far as our body functions go. We're going to kind of leave that off on the back burner, but this is biochemistry. So we're going to be looking at the chemistry of these structures. What makes it a carbohydrate? What functional groups should be there? What type of common reactions could maybe go forward when we take a carbohydrate and we put it into a system or make it go forward? Okay, so these reactions that we will talk about, that we will see, take place in very tiny laboratories, and these laboratories are known as cells, right? So all of a sudden, we are now looking at the chemistry that goes on in your body, right? So these reactions are applicable. These reactions do have a purpose. These reactions, they either, the way that your body treats them or the way that we analyze them in a laboratory. So all of these laboratories and these reactions that you'll see, they do have a purpose, even if that purpose is with the cell at the cellular level. All right, so where can we start? Well, let's first start at the word carbohydrate. C-A-R-B-O-H-Y-D-R-A-T-E. carbohydrate. And we need to take a look at the term and the name of carbohydrate because it's misleading. It's going to lie to you. And we're going to first break down this name into two pieces. Carb, of course, is our first half, and hydrate is our second half. So if I take a look at the word carb, I probably am going to assume that this thing has some carbon. And if I do, then I'm correct. These molecules, they do have carbon. The hydrate portion, if you go back to general chemistry, and we talked about hydrates during that time, hopefully if I asked you the question, what is a hydrate, you would say, oh, I remember what a hydrate was. A hydrate was water. So this probably is a carbon and water compound that has come together to give us this thing called a carbohydrate. And if you say that, you're partially true, not entirely correct. Why did we term them a carbohydrate back in the day? Well, the problem with this term is that all of the chemical analysis back when, well, the chemical analysis showed an exact match. Well, however many number of carbons that we had in a molecule, we had a matching number of what looked like water molecules associated with it. So basically what that means is that if we had 5 carbons, well, we looked like chemical analysis, elemental analysis, it looked like we had 5 water molecules that tagged along with it as well. So this is where the term carbohydrate came from. We took a look at the chemical and elemental analysis of these compounds that we were analyzing years and years and years ago, and we saw that the carbon number matched what looked like a water number. So 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, that typically makes water, right? The problem though is that it's not really water that's on the molecule. This is really a hydrogen and a OH group, and they're treated separately. So we made the mistake very early on in the day to assume that every time we saw 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, that this thing had to come together to make a water molecule for us. And in the form of a carbohydrate, that is not true. That is a lie. So the H2 and the O are actually represented on the structure as a hydrogen and a OH group. So now we need to look at the functional groups on carbohydrates. And carbohydrates, they don't really have water here. What they do have, however, are OH groups. And surely you can tell me what an OH group is as far as functional group goes. If you can't tell me that an OH group is a alcohol group, then you might want to drop the class at this point, because that's a very bad sign if you do not understand OH is an alcohol. Alright, so now we kind of get a better picture of what this carbohydrate is going to look like. It's probably going to consist of some carbon, it's going to consist of some hydrogen, and it's going to consist of some oxygen. And guess what? That is true. We need to look at how these structures and how these things are going to link up, however. But before we do that, I want to talk about, a little bit at least, about the term of carbohydrate. One of the first things that you need to take away from this family of organic is that it is the most abundant. All right, out of all of the biomolecules that are out there, the carbohydrates are the most abundant class of compounds in the biological world, at least. So very, very, very common. Almost every time we turn around, we're seeing some form of a carbohydrate in our face, whether you realize that or not. If you take a look at the dry mass of Earth, the current statistic is 50% of the dry mass is classified as a carbohydrate. So think about that for a minute. If we took all of the solids kind of found on Earth and we lumped them together, 50% of those solids would be some type or some form of a carbohydrate. So that's pretty outstanding. Carbohydrates have many functions, so they're multifunctional as well. Some of the functions that they have, of course, are structural components. We see these in plants, we see these in various other things as well. They also serve as a recognition site, which means, our bodies and our cells talk to each other through these kind of doorways. And these doorways are these recognition sites that we can talk about, that we will see a little bit later on in the future. Not only that, but carbohydrates also serve as an energy source. So we get our energy, we move around because we ingest and we use carbohydrates as some of our energy source. It's not the only energy source, but it is one of them. Okay, so this is the story with carbohydrates. This is a little bit of background that you need to take away. These carbohydrates, if we really want to be prim and proper, can go by a term. And these carbohydrates are called Polyhydroxy Aldehydes or Polyhydroxy Ketones. Now, again, we need to break down the name. We need to figure out what do these terms really represent. So let's take a look at our first one, polyhydroxy aldehyde. Okay, so poly, of course, means many. Hydroxy means OH group. And aldehyde means, functional group-wise, surely you can get this, an aldehyde is a C double bond OH. So we have many OH groups on an aldehyde compound. The same is going to hold true for the polyhydroxy ketones. Polyhydroxy basically means many OHs again, but this time it's on a organic compound that's classified as a ketone, which means a carbon double bond O, and on this side we have some kind of random alkyl chain, and on this side we have some kind of random alkyl chain. Again, if you don't know what the aldehyde functional group was and the ketone functional group was, you are probably going to be in trouble this semester. I would heavily encourage you to go back and take a look and review some of these basic organic chemistry topics, so that way you can be more prepared when the more complicated organic chemistry is coming around with the carbohydrates. So there's two versions of a carbohydrate that we need to look at. We need to look at the aldehyde version, we need to look at the ketone version. Both of these have something in common. There's many OH groups on these structures. And not only that, but now we kind of get a backstory about a carbohydrate and what's so important with it. If I go back and take a look at these recognition sites are very important. And the reason that they are important is because this, ladies and gentlemen, is a recognition site. This is a picture of an egg and sperm. And these two recognize each other and they play off of each other, and there's a reaction between each other because of the carbohydrate recognition sites that are on the egg itself. Now, how really does the chemistry happen? How does the organic mechanism happen? Well, that we can't give you a full story on because we don't really fully understand it ourselves. But we do know that there is a carbohydrate on the surface of the egg, and that is what the sperm sees, and that is what makes this connectivity between these two things, right? And of course, when that happens, life can begin to exist. So it's all due to a carbohydrate, and that is what we call cellular recognition or molecular recognition. So choose your words wisely. Here is a carbohydrate that is a necessity for life, or to at least begin life, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of appreciation from it as well.